Hello, Santiago. How are you?
Hello. I'm very well. How are you?
I am good. I'm hanging in here up north where it's gray. We've talked a few times in the past. We're well aware of each other and have even attended what was it, Atlanta, a level 3 or 4,
Yep.
I think. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah,
you
phase
traveled
three.
all the way. Yeah. So we're very familiar with each other and each other's work, but I kind of want you to tell everyone, what area of sports that you're working in with Brainspotting and what that looks like.
Well, I've been doing brain spotting for about 4 years. I first came across it in 2016, and I did my phase one with the one and only Pie Fry, one of my favorite trainers, and then
Yay.
phase two with Pie, phase three with David, where you and I met. And I've been doing a lot of private practice that includes clinical work and sports as well. So I don't work with organizations per se. I just work with private athletes, mostly golfers, which is a sport that I used to play a lot and know very well psychologically. So most of my athlete clientele is golf players or other types of sports working more with injury related issues. And so I've had the opportunity to work on performance enhancement using setups for that, as well as injury rehab, uh, combining it with other modalities, of course, and a lot of trauma based work with clients. And I'm talking abusive parents, abusive coaches, uh,
Yeah.
poor relationships, things
Yeah.
like that. You know,
Can,
you wouldn't think athletes get those things and have those kinds of traumas, but it's more common than we're willing to accept or than we know.
Yeah, we haven't talked a lot about abusive coaches, surprisingly, in the last couple of hours. So let's jump into that a little bit. What do you see with athletes? What does that look like?
Well, the relationship between or the way the trauma is processed or expressed in an athlete when you have had an abusive or neglectful parent or an abusive or neglectful coach is quite similar. There's an ambiguous relationship where I love my parent or coach and at the same time I hate him, and it's very hard for the athlete to stay grounded and to know with certainty what they want about themselves and what others want from them. And
Mm.
there's usually a lot of dissociation. I've noticed a lot of dissociation associated to it, and it's probably because the abuse has been or was ongoing for quite some time that they need to find a way to numb themselves from the mental agony and the physical agony of having to perform poorly and expect the abuse.
Mm.
Um, the athletes that I work with abusive parents have had parents who have really strong personality disorders, mostly the mothers, and that symbiotic relationship you develop with mom gets broken and hindered in such a way that it is going to permeate every aspect of the client of the athlete's life. It's not
Mm.
only their performance, is the relationships, is the rapport they have with you. Sometimes they will express that frustration or that fear onto you as the professional as well. And that makes brain spotting such a wonderful and exquisite tool because without too much talking, without having to try to circumvent the feeling, you jump right into it with a pointer and the processing.
Mm.
And that's when the athlete goes, "Oh my God, I didn't know I could get rid of all this anger and this frustration so easily." So for a lot of them, it's a really easy process, and they love it because it doesn't involve talking. A lot of athletes really hate talk therapy. They like Federico was saying, there's the macho culture where if you talk about your feelings, you're weak and you're not worthy and you're not a tough athlete. And brain spotting breaks down those barriers very nicely. So they sit there, they look at the pointer, and they're either at a research spot or they're processing, and they have all these physical reactions. And after a few minutes ago, my gosh, I've been working on this for years, and now I have just released, and I feel like a brand new person. So I have found that working with, abusive coaches who come from abusive backgrounds, that's the main issue. Abusive parents were abused themselves, or were the victims of trauma, and abusive coaches the same thing. They're victims of trauma. And I think it's important to address the fact that brain spotting is not only good for the athlete. I mean, the coach is the first person who would need, or who would benefit rather, from incorporating these techniques into their work. Because coaches don't sleep well, they get stressed, they get a lot of pressure. Their livelihood depends on results and how well they do. And when you have all that stress being cooped up inside the body, well, it's the perfect recipe for disaster. And you have coaches who go into depression. You have coaches who start verbally abusing their athletes, and you have coaches who attempt suicide, or you get coaches who are successful at ending their lives. And interventions like brain spotting, I think, are quite necessary, not only from a performance enhancement perspective, but from a life enhancement perspective. After all, athletes, yes, they're famous and they're good because of what they do, and they're well known because of what they do, but they're human beings too. They have feelings, they stress just like any of us, they don't sleep well at times just like any of us, they have faulty relationships like many of us, they come from dysfunctional families, and we need to address the human side first. And when we address the human side, then I think we can tap into the athletic persona and get more of a profound effect with what we do.
Yeah, and so it's interesting some of that you're talking about. I have found too that sometimes an athlete can't get away from a coach. That there's nowhere to go, and so by brain spotting, you can kind of desensitize them around how their coach is reacting and acting, to where they're just not even responding nervous system wise. So you're bringing up a good point there of the abuse and the trauma that can happen, but you can actually strengthen the athlete to where, so if they have this coach that's not willing to work on their stuff, who's reactive and unconsciously dumping on the team and all these things, they can still perform well, and you don't have to quit the team, because you see that happens a lot with athletes, is they just will quit the sport because of the coach, and you're like, well, we don't have to do that, so it's good point there, with that. It's like, this is not just between their relationship and the sport and the athlete themselves. It has to do with all of their systems. So very good with that. And then another thing that you touched on there. So when we're talking about this, whole athlete and whole life and some of those things. And we didn't talk about it in the last two sessions. So I was going to get your take on this, because I know you've worked with the national team and doing some qEEG monitoring and some of that stuff. Do you see, and it's kind of a phenomenon in a way, and most people would not think this is the case, but after a big win, after an Olympic medal, after a Super Bowl, title, an athlete will go through a depression. Have you seen that happen?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just think of all the energy that it takes for you to get that gold medal and get on the podium, or get a world championship, or the national championship. Your joy and your efforts and your trials and tribulations are just devoted to that very moment. And when you finally achieve, you're left with what's next now. And the joy and the happiness that goes along with winning is really short-lived. It's a day or two of this wonderful plethora of emotions and thoughts, and then after that, all the energy is spent, and the brain is just left with, that was it. I mean, what now? And so you go into, I notice athletes going into questioning themselves a lot. What do I want now? Now that I have accomplished this, what's left for me to do? I thought that this would last for longer, and I thought that I would carry this joy with me for the rest of my life. And now I just don't know what to do anymore. I mean, I have accomplished this. I have proven to myself, maybe I have proven to the world that I can do this. And what's left? And I think that in part, and we see it with the EEG, the brain is going to devote a lot of energy into this. And all these chemicals get moving towards that goal. And when those chemicals get depleted, I mean, your dopamine is gone, your serotonin is gone. You don't have anything to hang on to, chemically wise, to sustain the emotion. And because we're talking about that, one of the things that I do is I do a lot of what I like to call preemptive brain spotting, in that I brain spot those moments for you. And I say, look, I want you to win. If you win, that's great. It's going to be wonderful. You're going to feel like $1 million, but be mindful. And I've noticed this myself, and I've noticed this with others, that it's going to get to a point where you're going to get sad, or you're going to feel extremely sad, or you could feel depressed. And so the athlete says, okay, what do we do about that? And I say, well, let's go into the future. Let's kind of jump into the future with a setup. Let's do a brain spotting session for that, or a couple of brain spotting sessions for that. Because I want you to picture yourself winning, and I want you to picture yourself after you've won, after you have accomplished this. And I want you to still feel valuable. I still want you to feel that you're enough. And I still want you to feel like you have purpose, that there's many other things after winning, after you retire from your sport, that will bring you the same joy, that will bring you the same sense of purpose, that will bring you the same sense of meaningfulness. Because otherwise, you're going to be sitting there and thinking, what have I done with my life? I mean, yes, I won and people recognize me and this was wonderful and I made a lot of money and fame and fortune and I feel grateful, but now I have nothing to go for. So what I try to do is to drive the system in a way that the athlete has the resources before the event even happens. It's just building up the resources. It's just like saving for a rainy day. And so we're putting up the money, and if a rainy day comes, I have where to withdraw from. You know, I don't have to go into over drafting my money, you know, or over withdrawal. I have the savings for that. So we're creating physiological savings, we're creating emotional savings, we're creating psychological and neurophysiological savings, so that athlete is ready for it. It's happened to me. You know, I've been lucky enough to be in demand for the past few years, and I've done interviews. And it happened to me a couple of years ago when I did an interview with CNN, and that was my biggest score career-wise. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is CNN, and I go on to CNN, and I don't know, 40 million people around the world saw the interview, and it was great. And the next day, I was just so depressed, thinking, I'm such an imposter. What am I going to do with my life now? So after learning about that experience, I decided to get brain spotted myself for it and brain spot my clients for it. And, you know, like Jessica was saying this morning, it's not only the sports arena, the sports realm. You know, this happens to business people, and it happens to CEOs, and it happens to students, and it happens to, you know, regular everyday people. We accomplish something, and then we're left with that sensation of what next. So when we prepare the body, when we prime the brain for it, we are winning the battle because we have laid the groundwork for it. And since you're asking about the EEG, is really good because that's something we can measure now. We can measure the brain spotting experience through the electroencephalography, or the EEG. So we can see what is happening in the brain before we brain spot somebody, as we are brain spotting somebody, and after we brain spot somebody. And we can use that information to optimize what we do with brain spotting. And I think the work that I'm doing with the EEG is really exciting because it's going to help every single brain spotter out there, in the world, just to become a better professional.
Yeah. What would you tell a coach that you're seeing on EEGs with athletes and brain spotting?
Well, I don't normally work with a lot of coaches. You know, golfers tend to be their own athlete and coach in a way. So I have somewhat the luxury of not having to deal with the coaches. But when I do have to work with a coach, I don't normally explain brain spotting. I show them brain maps. And when
Okay.
I show them the 3D images of the brain, you know, I know I'm making a good sales pitch, because a picture's worth 1,000 words. And
Right.
when they see brain activity and I say, we can record this live, they go, okay, so how do you do it? Then I take the pointer and I say, and just like Jessica was doing the exercise with food with you this morning, I do it with a specific sports situation. I go, okay, let's think about a coaching moment that was very stressful for you, a very tough time in your career. And then we get an activation from it. And I usually take my heart rate variability sensor. We sense the pulse from the ear. And I
Mm.
show them on the computer what we're seeing. And I say, this is what your heart is doing when you think
And what
about
do
a
you
stress.
see? And what do you see for people who don't know what that would look like? What do you see in an activation?
Normally, you would see the heart rate's going to speed up greatly, and the variability is going to go down. That means that the heart rhythmicity is going to get really out of whack. It's going to get disorganized. We do not need, any human being doesn't want or need a disorganized heart rhythm. We need a coherent, very nice, flowing, very pretty looking heart rhythm. And when the coach goes on an activation spot, their heart rate jumps to 120 beats per minute. I had a coach who went to 180 beats per minute just by thinking about it. He wasn't even talking about it. He was just
He needs
thinking
brain
about
spotting. Yeah.
it. Right. And so I do a double spot. I take the pointer and we find a research spot and I'm holding it there. And then we're looking at the heart rate slow down. And, you know, a heart math system, which is what a lot of people use, goes into green. And when it lights up green, it means you're relaxed. You're feeling good. You're grounded. There's no worries. You're cool, calm, and collected. And
Yeah.
so when they see it, I say what we do is we take this wonderful technique called brain spotting, but we have the technological resources to show you, first of all, that it works, and second of all, how and why it works. And they get sold on it because they're seeing it live. So I've been lucky enough to have access to EEG technology and HRV, heart rate variability technology, and muscle tension technology that allows me to record the process in real time and to quantify the changes. So
Right.
what this does is it takes brain spotting from being purely anecdotal to being, yes, it is anecdotal, yes, it works, but we have tangible evidence as to why it works. Now, the next phase is to start publishing this evidence, because if it is not published, it doesn't exist. I mean, I don't really subscribe to the idea, but that's how the world works. And if that's what we have to do, then that's what we have to do.
Okay. And so again, talking about some of this, you know, whole athlete, whole life kind of stuff with the sports performance. Obviously, you know, when I work with an athlete who's making the decision to retire, you know, we start right after and we are going, okay, you know, this is on you. This is what it looks like to retire. This is what it, you know, looks like to continue in the sport. And so we've had these decisions a lot with professional athletes and all of that. But really, like you're saying, I found that prefacing, which is a little different again from typical brain spotting, but we are tightening that frame in being like, okay, well, what would that look like? You know, it's like, and then having them kind of dump out the sad, bad loss of identity pieces and then seeing what's left over, you know, where their strengths lie and some of those things. So a really big point there. I think that athletes think, well, you know, I quit the sport. Now I don't need sports psych anymore. It's like, no. That's kind of when you need it so that you do move on with your life. So I guess, you know, just trying to reiterate that, because I think that that's a, you know, faltered way of thinking with an athlete, because I know even myself, when college athletics stopped, I was pretty lost, ended up getting into drinking and not great things, and that's what led me to healing with Brainspotting at 23. Was I was just kind of out of control. Yeah, I really didn't know what to do with myself there. It left the sports exercise science major and world and being in sports, and then what, you know? So really, I wish I'd had Brainspotting 2 years earlier, and then maybe some of the hard road that I traveled would not have had to happen. So I don't know, with you being a past athlete, can we speak about that a little more? And with Brainspotting, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, I draw, when you were talking about your own experiences, I'm drawing a lot from my dad. My dad was a professional soccer player, and he's a big deal down here. He's very famous down here. And that's how I got started in sports. I started playing soccer.
Oh, cool.
And I played soccer until I was 19, 20 years old, and I took golf. And more recently, I've been doing rock climbing. And my dad had to retire early because of an injury. He had a very promising career. He was getting very, very famous. I'm talking Cristiano Ronaldo fame status. And
Wow.
and so he had an injury, which it was an ACL tear, you know, any injury that's very common and quite recoverable today. But back then, you know, we're talking 70s, 80s. The surgery wasn't as precise, and he tried to return a couple of times successfully, but he wasn't able to. And I was very young then, but then talking about him, about the experience, you could sense the regret and the sadness, and mostly the emptiness he experienced from not being able to go more and go further in his career. And so when I see that in other athletes, I just try to think about my dad and say, well, let's see what we can do to save this athlete here. How can we help that transition, and how can we help with that loss of identity, like you're saying? I think a big drawback with athletes is that they fall in love with their sports persona so much that they forget that there's more to them, you know. And there's the business side. After they can go into coaching, they can have successful businesses, they can go into broadcasting, they can start their own teaching and coaching academy. And they get so caught up in the love of the sport and what they do that they don't realize that their body is not going to respond the same way, and at some point in their life they're not going to be able to do it anymore. And that's very hard to accept. It's really hard to accept, you know. So what an essential component of Brainspotting is that you can provide them, and you can do it ahead of time. Again, the preemptive strike. You go into that moment in their life. You take them to that moment in their life. When that happens, they're going to be ready. And you know, when my dad knew I was learning about Brainspotting, and I did a few sessions with him, he said, "Gosh, I wish that I had this when I was retiring. Yep. This would have helped me transition much better." And you know, he later became a successful coach, and he ran his own soccer academy for 30 some years. And he's retired now, and he's enjoying life. But he says, even though I did well, I could have done better. I could have dealt with the pain so much better. I could have dealt with the trauma. And he put it that way. It was a trauma for me to retire that young, because I was at the top of my game. Mm-hmm. I had this big ego where everybody knew me. And I didn't want my soccer player persona to end. And that was very heartbreaking. So if I had done Brainspotting back then, I think I would have transitioned more smoothly, more successfully. And I'm glad you're doing it with athletes now, because we need it. We really struggle once the curtain comes down, because we know it's not going to go back up, not in the same way anyways. And if we have that way of going deep within ourselves, getting to know and awakening the parts that we know can be successful after sports, then things are different. And that's some of the aspects that I enjoy. I do enjoy the performance aspect, and I do love it when an athlete wins, and I was part of the process. But more than that, I really enjoy bringing back the hope that they once lost, and helping them understand that they can still be productive, and they can still be meaningful to society, and they can still be enough after they, you know, they're not playing soccer or golf or whatever they're doing anymore. And so I find joy in knowing that I'm contributing, even if it is a small part, I'm contributing to that process. And that's one of the things I like about Brainspotting. It's such an exquisite exchange with the person. And that's why I love measuring with the EEG, because you can see the profound changes that are taking place. You know, we're only scratching the surface and we have a long way to go, but we're starting, which is the important thing.
Yeah. And so you bring up a point here of sports trauma. And so you talked about your dad, and my decision to retire was, you know, there was the end point at nationals and college. Your dad's decision to retire was the end point of the injury. So those things are traumatic. You know, people don't realize that is trauma. But, you know, pulling back before the retirement, though, the sports trauma, do you see on your qEEGs or an EEG a difference between emotional and physical injury with an athlete? Have you been able to tease out the differences in what that looks like?
Yeah, they tend to have quite distinct brainwave patterns. And one of the beautiful things about the EEG is that the brain has signatures for different components. You know, they tend to overlap for the most part, but when you have done assessments long enough and you have repeated them enough, you start seeing it. They start jumping at you. And it's interesting because you develop this clinical eye where you see it and you go, oh, I know what that is now. And there are specific brain regions that are activated depending on, first of all, what kind of trauma it was, and then second about if the perceptual or emotional centers are more activated. Let's say if an athlete has more of a depression type symptom as a consequence of the trauma, whatever the trauma is, you're going to see it more frontally. And you usually see it in the alpha range. Alpha brain waves are specific bandwidth that's related to many things. And when you have a lot of alpha brain waves in the front, especially with the eyes open, that means that your emotional centers are getting stuck. Those networks are turning on, but they're not turning off. So you get stuck in sadness and depression, and there's a dwelling to it. Dwelling and fretting on it, it's a very important component. You know, and they just ruminate and ruminate and ruminate, and that means they get worse. Now, if you sit parietally, or sometimes the posterior temporal lobes, it's more of an emotional social response. They get more withdrawn socially, and they tend to involve the insula, which is towards the right temporal lobe. And that's more of an agitated depression type deal for them, in that they get very anxious, but they get very depressed at the same time. They get very anxious because they don't know what to do. They don't have the resources to deal with the frustration. And as a consequence of not being able to deal with the anxiety, well, they get depressed because they feel impotent about the situation. So they get sad. And this area of the brain right here, which we call T6, temporal lobe posterior, when you see a high peak in the alpha frequency, that's a marker for trauma or PTSD. So a lot of athletes with a trauma history will have a peak in the alpha range here.
Interesting.
And you immediately know there's some kind of trauma. Now, you don't challenge them and you don't confront them. You say, you know, based on your brainwave activity, I'm seeing this region of the brain, and it shows me that you might have experienced something adverse. I don't usually use the word traumatic to avoid the reaction, so I say adverse. And they go, like what? Maybe an injury, maybe you had a coach who yelled at you a lot, maybe your parents were sometimes too pushy with your sport, and they go, oh yeah, can you tell me more about it, please? And then they start talking about it. Because it's an art to know how to feed back the information to the athlete so they don't feel confronted.
Yeah, and so you normalized it, you showed them that this is a exercise science kind of thing, that this is not just some weakness, and then you jump right in with that frame. So that would be where you could just jump right in then with someone. They're just going.
Yeah.
So and then letting it go where it needs to go, and then you're resolving that.
Yeah, and sometimes it allows me to jump right into the brain spotting without explaining it. I say, can I try something with you? And they go, yeah, what is it? So I take the pointer and I say, this tool right here is going to help us go deep into that and see if we can process from it. Would you be interested in processing? And they go, heck yeah. I mean, I want to feel better. This has been bugging me for the past 10 years or so. And so we find a spot, and I do short bouts where I have them activate and then talk about it. So I go subcortical, bring them back cortically, and subcortical and bring them back cortically. Sometimes I don't go full subcortical because I don't know how they're going to react. I don't want them to react negatively to it. And when they understand what we're trying to do, they go, that's quite interesting. You know, one of the things I love about working with athletes is that if we're standing on the top of a roof with an athlete and I say, I want you to jump, they're going to go, you want me to jump feet first or head first? And so they trust you. They really do. They do it because they're built that way. They're engineered that way. And they seldom challenge what you're trying to do. They will if they don't feel safe, but they seldom challenge it. They really trust you, sometimes quite blindly. And you do whatever you do. You know, with clinical clients, you have to go through a different process. You know, they're more skeptical. They have more challenging notions. They really take a long time to trust you. You have to build really good rapport before you try something with them. And with athletes, I have found that's not the case. So in my experience, it makes the brain spotting process a lot easier to implement. And I've been lucky enough to work with athletes where we caught the coach, and because they don't work with it, it's not because we're isolating the coach, it's because they come to me are out of their own volition, and that helps. That helps circumvent talking to the parents and the coach and having to explain a thing and having them challenge you. And so it works beautifully. But again, to me, it's all about integration. I love brain spotting. I have had the privilege of being brain spotted by David, as you witnessed in Atlanta. And then I went to his office in New York, and I was brain spotted there a couple of times. And he's just an artist. And I've been brain spotted by Debbie Antinori, and I've been brain spotted by Pie Fry, by Sue Pinko. Different styles, all of them are wonderful. So as a recipient, I can say it works. Now, as a scientist, my passion is about uncovering the secrets of why it works. And that's why I think that the EEG work that I'm doing, that they're doing in Spain, that they're doing in Canada, it's very crucial at this stage in our field. And then I like to integrate it with mindfulness. I like to integrate it with biofeedback. I like to integrate it with neurofeedback. Nutrition is very important. The photobiomodulation work that you do is outstanding. I don't think that any intervention, including brain spotting, is a one-size-fits-all approach. Yeah, it needs to be integrated into different things. The neat thing about what I do is, again, having the access to state-of-the-art technology that allows us to visualize that process. And I think in the next few years, you know, if we're still around, we're going to be able to provide the world and our field with the evidence and more information about how we can make this tool more powerful. Because as of now, we face a lot of skepticism because of the lack of data. Now we have the opportunity. So that's what really my work is all about.
Very cool. Yeah. And so you mentioned style there, and you know, that's the thing within our community that you're hearing all the time when people are just learning brain spotting and getting out there. They're afraid they're doing it wrong, or there's this certain very specific way if they're not doing it this way. Could you speak more about style and some of that?
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed, and I did notice it with myself in the beginning, is you try to shadow somebody, you know. My first contact was Pi, and I think Pi is not only a wonderful human being, I love her to death, but she is just a very, very skillful brain spotter. You know, when you're working with her, you feel so safe, and she takes you to this place, and she's just so eloquent in the way she moves the pointer and the way she looks at you, and she does the dual attunement. And for a while I was trying to mimic some of her mannerisms, and I found that's not the way you do it. I said, you know what, I'm going to be myself, I'm going to learn from my mistakes, and I'm going to develop my own way of doing it. My recommendation for every brain spotter, especially those who are beginning, is just do your own thing. And you know, sometimes you're not going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to feel you made mistakes, and that's okay. This, like reading the EEG, you're always a student of the EEG. You're never a master of the EEG. You never get to know the EEG completely. Same thing with brain spotting. You're never going to know brain spotting completely. You're always a student of brain spotting. You know, it's just like an alcoholic. You have recovered. You haven't had a drink in 30 years. You're still recovering. It's just how it is. So what I would suggest is maybe take things from different, you know, brain spotters that you admire, and take those things and maybe see how you can integrate them to your own way of doing it. And then develop, I don't want to say a system, but I'll say system for lack of a better word, your own process, your own style, your own, you know, your own gimmick, if you will, you know, your own mannerisms, your own way of looking at the client. You know, sometimes I look at the client, I squint. Sometimes I look at him with my eyes wide open. Sometimes I nod. Sometimes I don't. And it's just, I just have found that through trial and error, I have developed that. It would be a mistake trying to do it like David does, because there's only one David Grant. Just like there's only one Paige Roberts, just like there's only one Santiago Brand, and only one Jessica, and only one Federico. You know, there's only one of you, and don't worry about getting it wrong. You're going to get it wrong whether you try or not. And sometimes you're going to make mistakes, and sometimes you're going to look clumsy, and you're going to feel clumsy. Learn from that and just go.
Well, and yeah, and what you're speaking of again is this uncertainty principle, and that it is client led. I think that's hard for some therapists. You know, I had the I don't know, benefit of getting brain spotting done on me for my post-concussion stuff when I was 23. So I knew what it looked like. I knew what it felt like. Then went on, did my graduate degree, and was ready, you know, did my brain spotting training even in my graduate studies. So I was just like, this is how you do therapy. This is how you work with athletes. But that's really not the case. You know, most people come into this with a talk therapy background, and it can be challenging, you know, to do weight, like why am I talking, and some of the principles that we talk about. So that's also another piece too, when we're talking about clients who come in whom have been therapized, as I say it. You know, they come in, they're going, well, my mom did this, and this is why I am the way I am. I'm like, oh, okay, well, we're going to do brain spotting. You know, it's just really interesting because we have this set that we need to come in as a provider or something and tell someone what pathologically is wrong with them, and we need to kind of ruminate and stew on that. And so, but that's just not the case with brain spotting. It is that we are having them, you know, tightening the frame, whatever that looks like when the athlete comes in, you having the entry point of going, ooh, yeah, I'm seeing, you know, there's been a trauma expression on the EEG. So therefore, hey, did you have an injury or something? Let's work on this. So the frame's right there. It's set, the injury, whatever's going to come up is going to come up. Perhaps there was stuff with mom and dad, but we're not going to sit there and ask them, what's going on with mom and dad? You know, what happened with mom and dad? No, it's like, it's going to organically unfold. So, I mean, can you speak to more of that with the brain spotting tool?
I love that you're bringing that up, because I didn't mention it in the beginning. One of the reasons I got into brain spotting is because I love doing things that are new and controversial. And a lot of my colleagues here have been taught to drink the Kool-Aid. And so they're so traditional in the way they do things. And when I was, I had just retired from working in the Olympic Committee here. I worked there for 3 years developing the neuroscience lab, and I decided it was enough for me. It wasn't fun anymore, so I quit. And I was working on my own, doing my own thing, and I get a call from a squash club in Ecuador, and they tell me, we know about your work. We would like you to come and do some talks to our parents about being verbally abusive to their children athletes. And I said, yeah, of course. So I went on and I did a Google search for books, and I come across this book called This Is Your Brain in Sports. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. I buy the book, I get it, I start reading it, and it says brain spotting, brain spotting, brain spotting, brain spotting. I go, this brain spotting thing sounds interesting. I'm going to go Google it online, find brainspotting.com. First video I see is David working with Mackie Sasser, and I was sold. I was like, oh, this is going to upset a lot of people back home. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to challenge their schemas and their the pre-notions that they have about psychology. I'm going to jump on the bandwagon on this one. And I searched for trainings, and then the first training was 2 weeks after that day I was searching with Pi Fry. So I signed up for it. I fly up to Philadelphia. I do the training with Pi, and I ask Pi ahead of time. I say, I'm going to fly. I would like to try it on myself. And she does a couple of brain spotting sessions with me. Love at first sight. Then phase 2 was 3 weeks after that in DC. Fly back home, fly to DC, do phase 2, and I keep on working. And then the phase 3 in Atlanta, about a year later. But what I'm trying to get at is that not only it's been controversial, and I get criticized a lot for it here. I don't care. I really don't. I mean, the way I see it is, if you're getting criticized, you're doing something right. And I'm doing it as I believe I'm doing it as ethically as possible. And it's, some people have embraced it, some people have not. That's just life. But many of my clients, the first thing they comment is, I like working with you because you don't make me talk about my problems.
Right.
I don't have to sit here in front of you and give you the whole shebang for an hour straight. And I go home and I feel worse,
Right.
And they say, when you take that thing out and you're holding it in front of my eyes, I don't know what's going on, but I feel better. And I have had the chance to work with a lot of females who have been the victims of sexual assault. And 2 or 3 sessions down the road, they tell me, you know what? It doesn't upset me anymore.
Right.
I'm moving on with my life. I had one female client who had been sexually abused very early on in her life. And she was not feeling attracted to men anymore. And then after 3 sessions, she says, I'm feeling attracted to men, and I have a friend who's courting me and he wants us to go out, and I'm going to give it a shot. Oh. I mean, I started doing CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and I never heard that after 3 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not trying to bash psychotherapy. I think it's important. And if combined, if done right, the right approach with brain spotting is more powerful. But I'm saying that I personally did not experience that when doing cognitive behavioral therapy. Not in such a short period of time and with such power. And so I think that's upsetting my colleagues even more. So that's why I keep doing it. And I love it. And I had traumas of my own that I had addressed in psychotherapy. I felt it helped, but it took a long time. And I did a couple of sessions with Pi, and I mean, the changes were more profound, and that stuff bugging me altogether. People were saying, my then fiance, now wife, was telling me, what did they do to you, because you are such a better person. My parents were noticing it, my colleagues were noticing it, and then I get brain spotting by David, that very powerful session we had in Atlanta, and gosh, I don't know. I mean, it's just so interesting. And that's why I do it. And I stopped doing talk therapy because it's draining. And to me, it's not fast enough. Brain spotting is. If I have to send psychotherapy, I will. Another interesting finding I have with brain spotting is that many of my clients, when I suggest the possibility of psychotherapy, they're very reluctant. They go, oh, heck no, I'm not going to do that. And I say, okay, that's fine. I do some sessions of Brainspotting. I do some sessions of neurofeedback. And when we have that central nervous system being flexible enough, and I bring up psychotherapy again, they go, okay, yeah, sure, let's give it another try. And many of them go try it again, and they benefit fully from it. I think that the power of Brainspotting is gaining that flexibility into the central nervous system that you cannot gain with cognitive behavioral therapy or any other kind of talk therapy for that matter. The changes are so organic, like you were saying, and so deep that we are really transforming the neurochemistry and the neurophysiology, and we're opening up the possibilities. Clients start seeing things, feeling things, thinking things that they thought they could not before, or they were not able to before. When you open that, the floodgates that way, then the client is open to anything. And you have a client who's going to get better because they're integrating stimuli in a very, in a very rich way. And that's why I like doing it. And again, it's controversial. I like it. I don't like following the status quo and sticking with the same therapy over and over. That's why I got into neurofeedback. That's when I'm getting into event-related potential. That's why I got into Brainspotting, because they're new. It never gets old. You see a case and you never stop being amazed by what you do with Brainspotting, when you do it with your clients or when you're the recipient.
So amazing, for one, with all of your, insight. I think, so yes, it's exciting, it's controversial, and that can be difficult with sports sometimes too, because we've got these old cultures around mental health and in any of those pieces. But you're going in and normalizing it, destigmatizing it by showing the science of, but the stuff that we're really talking about here is translatable to, the average population, but really athletes are the average population, aside from their nervous system being a little more advanced than ours, because that's their genetic gifted potential. And so I think that, when we're talking about this, them feeling different. I mean, I've had athletes just be almost sopping wet and sweat when we've done a session. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced the same kind of thing, because they are working through stuff. And so they're like, hey, it's like I just did a workout, and they enjoy it. And then the other thing, yes, we're changing their physiology, is you have done, and you're doing some more research on it, of the mirrored neuron attuned presence aspect of Brainspotting. And something with that I find is very powerful is, and you said it also, the quantum physics of the hormonology of our mind is able to change our biochemistry, right? And then also they talk about within quantum physics, if the provider, and this is something I enjoy about Brainspotters, because I go around some other psychs and I get really tired of the pathologizing people saying, oh my gosh, this person had this, they're probably access too. This just goes on and on and on with this, how sick or how dysfunctional or how dysregulated our clients are, and then being ready for that. Well, what's their diagnosis coming in? I better be ready. And it's like, no, actually with the Brainspotting, and I want you to kind of speak on this with the mirror neurons, the attuned presence in these things, is that if we are sitting here saying anything is possible when this client comes in, healing wise, whatever that looks like, then they'll actually heal, right? I mean, there's something there. Their mirror neurons are communicating with ours. So if we're sitting here saying, oh, they're sick, they're never going to get better, this is their diagnosis, this is their ceiling of health here, as opposed to Brainspotting, where it's like we're literally following comets, as we say it. What do you think about some of that piece?
Well, it's quite fascinating. In my talks, I always mention a study called the Healer and Healee paper, and they took a healer. I don't remember what type of healing he did specifically, but he was not a psychotherapist. He was a healer, and they had a client, the healing, and what they did is they hooked them both up to an EEG machine. So they were recording the brainwaves of the healer, the brainwaves of the healee at the same time. And what they found is after a few minutes, their brainwave activity synchronized. in the beginning of the session, the brainwaves of the healer were moving at a certain frequency, and the ones of the healer at a different frequency. So they were not in sync. And then after a few minutes, when the dual attunement takes place, they both start moving in the same direction, what we call phase locked in sync. And so this has been measured scientifically. One of the things I am dying to do is to do the same thing with a brain spotting and a brain spotty, if you will. So the brain spotted is, we're reading the EEG, we're taking the client, and we're reading the EEG. Because I think the dual attunement process that takes place in brain spotting can be measured, can be recorded, and it can be demonstrated scientifically with concrete data, with graphs, with 3D brain images. You know, this is not something we're making up. This is something that's real. And like you're saying, the mirror neuron system is crucial and for that process to take place. That's where the style of the brain spotting comes in handy, because the way you approach it is or what you do is what your client is going to follow. If you're empathetic enough, if you're honest enough, sincere enough, you're going to have very good dual attunement. It might not be as strong as when you have more experience, but it will take place. And what happens in clients, specifically those with dissociation, is that their mirror neuron system shuts down. So they cannot respond to a clues. And you ask them to do something, and they look at you like you're explaining it in Hebrew. And that's because their mirror neuron system is not getting it. You know, they're so dysregulated, they're not getting it. Wow. And in the EEG, we can see it in the form of mu brainwaves. Mu brainwaves take place in the sensory motor cortex, left and right. And in trauma, they're a sign of dissociation, that they're a sign that the mirror neuron system is not responding to external clues. Wow. And one thing that I've done in my work with heart rate variability is when I see clients with mu, I connect them to the EEG machine, and the minute the mu brainwaves appear, I teach them to do deep diaphragmatic breathing. And normally after a couple of minutes, the mu starts going away, starts desynchronizing. And what we're doing is we're breaking the dissociation. Right. And we're bringing them back here. So they're coming to. Now we can start brain spotting because they're going to be present. They're going to be able to respond to what we're telling them, how we're looking at them, the way we're expressing it, the way we're dressed, you know, their facial expressions, the way we look. They're going to respond to all of that, whereas before they couldn't. Now, I have not done the mu thing with brain spotting, and that's something I would love to do at some point, where we're able to be around people again and not risk, you know, COVID and everything else. Yeah. But to me, I think brain spotting will help break the dissociation. I know that heart rate variability biofeedback does, and I have EEG recordings to prove it. I think brain spotting will do the same thing. And I think the way you conduct yourself as a brain spotter, it's very important. The more artistic you are, the more sincere you are, the more yourself you are, the more you're going to be able to connect with the client's mirror neuron system. Because the brain somehow understands and perceives that honesty. You know, if you're BSing them, the brain will know. And the further they go into dissociation, they're gonna stand back because they want to get re-victimized. Right. But when they sense that, their mirror neuron system opens up and goes, okay, let's see where this takes us. And when you take the pointer and you find a spot, that's where you go, you know. So that's when you're able to do all this razzle dazzle stuff that you do as a therapist. But I think that the way your demeanor as a brain spotter practitioner, it's very important when it comes to the dual attunement process. Can it be measured? Yeah, it's been measured. Not specifically with brain spotting, but that's something that we are going to do very soon. I'm really can't wait to get on a plane, go somewhere and do the recordings and show what we can get.
Well, and as a brain spotter, I mean, I feel all my clients' stuff, so I know what's going on. You know when they're processing. Oh, yeah. So that's that magic thing that us brain spotters know that not everyone knows, that you do actually feel the physiology of your client. And so I guess, maybe the last thing, just really trying to get out there. We hadn't talked about the dual attunement very much with other people, so that's what we're doing here. But is I know that, and you've probably had it too, you have the athlete that is in this slump, that isn't doing great, and they're having a real hard time even believing in themselves. And so that's part of some of that dual attunement when they're coming in going, nope, this is going to work for you. Your nervous system isn't different than anyone else's. We're going to get you back on track. And I believe in you. And I mean, sometimes they'll walk out the door going, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, well, we'll see you next week. It's like, this is going to work.
Yeah.
But it's believing in the process.
Now that you mention it, now that you mention it, I think that what you're saying is a very important point, because I think as a practitioner, you need to believe in yourself if you want the client to believe in themselves. Even if you're not saying you're going to show it, you're gonna portray it with your body language, and you need to believe that you're going to be able to help that client heal. Even if you're feeling doubtful inside, fake the confidence. That's very important. I've had fake confidence time and again, because I know that client is trusting me with their lives. And part of the dual attunement process is that if the client senses that you're confident, they're going to go, okay, I can do this too. That's very important, because the brain is going to detect it. And when the brain waves synchronize, is because you're believing in yourself and you're getting your client to believe in themselves. That's very important.
Well, and I find, ironically, I have athletes who feel more hopeless than my average population sometimes. And it is just that sometimes they don't want to have high expectations because they are so low at that point in time in their life, and they don't want to be let down again when they go out there. So it's an interesting dance with an athlete within and around all this stuff. So, I'd like to say on one hand, athletes are just humans, but on the other hand, it's just this other level of intensity, perfectionist, high functioning nervous system, been put in this whole, space of this is who you are and this is your sport. And if you're not performing, you're nothing. Or if you're not, winning, you're nothing. So it's a little different still. But certainly wanting people out there to feel confident with, hey, doing some, introduction to, sports psychology and some of those pieces, and then, fine tuning the brain spotting skill, becoming a good brain spotter, having a ton of brain spotting done on themselves, because you got to know how it feels. And you want, as we've talked with these mirrored neurons, you want your energy clean. And they talk about it in the level 1 training of the limbic countertransference. Cherie and Cynthia, amazing instructors and healers, also talk about it very in depth in their course. But we want our energy to be very clean so that we are kind of assisting the athlete in learning how to regulate theirs and calm theirs down. We don't want a whole bunch of our skeletons reactivating us. So there's that piece. And I think that that's a piece with brain spotters that we're trying to solidify compared to, you'll get some of these other sports psychs coming in here doing this mental conditioning, just, ranting at an athlete. And it's like, well, have you done your work? You're pretty activated on this. This is kind of intense. So I just think that that's a really valuable piece within this modality and the standard. And I think, everyone today, obviously including myself, has done brain spotting, continues to keep their energy clean so that we can provide the best energetic space for our clients. So any final words here, Santiago?
Well, no, I really want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. It was a lot of fun. It's been truly a privilege to, listen to Jessica and then Federico, who are very knowledgeable as well. And I mean, I do admire your work and your persistence, like we were talking the other day. You've been pursuing this dream, and I know that better things are going to come your way and our way, because what we do is very special. For those interested in pursuing sports, I recommend that you do, because it's such a wonderful experience. There's nothing like working with athletes. I've always said that as sports psychologists are a special breed of people. We are our very own niche in a way, and it's wonderful. It's challenging, it's tough, but the fun that you can have is great. And you know, I also recommend that you get informed in trauma, you get informed in psychophysiology. It's something that I think that even if you don't pursue fully, it's important to understand, and that would be it.
Very cool. Well, we will be excited down the road here to see more of your results. And it's just super exciting. I mean, I love science, so I'm like, yay. Yeah, and keep providing us with more stuff. And again, this is just kind of the kickoff of us starting to try to do some more international stuff, and who knows where this is going to lead us, but just gaining that data so that we can go out there in the world and have every single sports team implementing brain spotting concurrently with the physical therapies would be the dream here. So very cool. Yeah. I guess we will say goodbye to you and conclude our first day here. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Look forward to talking to you soon again. And thanks everybody for attending. Hope it was fun, and look forward to teaching and learning more in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And we will say bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.